Good day and welcome back to the 10th session of the RDM module of the Data School. In this session, we will be focusing on open data and fair data principles. Please note that this presentation is based on a presentation by Ben Katraman, an introduction to research data management, fair and open data, which was presented at the CoData RDA Data Science School in Trieste, Italy in 2019. You'll remember that in our previous sessions we mentioned that in order to share data effectively, it is important to use appropriate repositories. We also mentioned that it is important to document and describe the data in such a manner that it will enable others to understand the data, use it and cite it. The issue of adding licenses so that others can use it was also mentioned. We also mentioned in previous sessions why it is important that data should be made available openly. The ideal is to make data available at every stage of the data lifecycle. This will have changed the manner in which the lifecycle flows, as researchers will publish their data earlier and will publish more. These publications will include papers, data, methods, and code used, and will support reproducibility. There are a number of international organizations that support research data management and open data. The first one that we are touching on now is FOSTER, which actually stands for Facilitate Open Science Training for European Research. It is a coordination initiative that supports different stakeholders, especially young researchers, in adopting open access in the context of the European research area and in complying with the open access policies and rules of the participation set out for Horizon 2020. And as part of this initiative, an e-learning portal was created and the FOSTER Open Science Toolkit was then developed. Please go and have a look at this toolkit. It's quite a useful tool to use. The next organization we touch on is OpenAIR. OpenAIR's mission is to shift scholarly communication towards openness and transparency and to facilitate innovative ways to communicate and monitor research. They foster open science dialogue for policies and they implement and their implementation in Europe and beyond. They provide interoperability services that connect research and enable researchers, content providers, funders, and research administrators to easily adopt open science. They also build global community standards for linking research and they facilitate transparency in research impact assessment. They train researchers, content providers, policymakers to acquire the skills and competencies needed to practice open science. They connect Europe to the global open research environment, and they facilitate open innovation by making all research information freely available so that third-party providers build value-added services to foster better understanding of scientific knowledge. The next organization is the Research Data Alliance. And the Research Data Alliance has various work groups and interest groups that you can join for free. So please go and have a look at the Research Data Alliance. Then you have CoData. And CoData also has a number of work groups and interest groups that are working on data. Various countries have their own national CoData committee. And CoData also arranges various data schools, such as the one that you are attending, as well as conferences. And CoData also publishes the Data Science Journal. DataCite is the international organization that provides digital object identifiers for data. So those are persistent identifiers for the data sets. So you're welcome to go and have a look at that link there as well. Right, now we come to fair data principles. We have heard before of this concept. Fair actually stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So that's what the acronym stands for. But what is fair? Well, FAIR is a set of principles that ensure that data are shared in a manner that enables and enhances the reuse by humans and machines. So where did this idea come from, this FAIR idea come from? It emerged from a workshop that was held at the Lorenz Center in Leiden, Netherlands in 2014. It developed first in the life sciences, but is intended for all types of data. FAIR was issued by Force 11, which is a community of scholars, librarians, archivists, publishers, and research funders. And it's also recommended by the Association of European Research Libraries. So what does FAIR mean? Let's look at the first principle, findable. It is to aid automatic discovery of relevant data sets as well as metadata, and this should be easy to be found by both humans and machines, and it should be assigned a persistent identifier. The second one, accessible. Under this one, limitations on the use of data and protocols for querying or copying data are made explicit for both humans and machines. Under interoperable, metadata should use standardized terms, in other words, controlled vocabularies, and have references to other metadata, and it should be machine actionable. Under reusable, the metadata are sufficiently well described for both humans and computers to be able to understand them, and they should have a clear and accessible data usage license. Right. This slide just gives an overview of the different FAIR principles. I'm not going to read through every principle, but under these four main principles, there are sub principles that you can go and read through and in your own time. Does FAIR data equal open data? In other words, can we say that if a data set is fair, it is also open? No, FAIR data does not have to be open. Data can be fair or open. It can be both or neither. Data can be shared under restrictions and still be fair. Making data fair ensures that it can be found, understood, and reused. Even though open data and fair data are different, they can be overlapping concepts. Fair data does not automatically imply that it needs to be accessible. There can be limitations to access, for example, for sensitive data. Accessibility of fair data means how to access and is defined in a human and machine readable way, in other words, a computer readable way. Fair data can be accessed by appropriate people at an appropriate time and in an appropriate way, depending on the purpose of the data. In other words, data can be fair when it is private, when it's accessible by a specific group of people, or when it's accessible by everyone. Open data, however, are available for all to access, use and share without licenses, copyright or patents, and it's only subjected to attribution share-alike licenses. The greatest potential for reuse and value comes when data are both fair and open. Now in this slide you will see you have your fair data and your open data. And where the two overlap, that is the most usable or valuable data that you need to increase. And that is what we would like to see, is the data are both fair and open. So how fair is your data? There's also a data checklist that you can use to determine if your data complies to the fair data principles. So go and have a look at that checklist. Now the Australian Research Data Commons, or ARDC, which is an initiative between ANDS, Nectar and RDS, developed a fair self-assessment tool that enables you to assess the fairness of a dataset, and it also helps you to determine how to enhance a dataset's fairness. Then you also get the Go Fair initiative. And what they have implemented, they've implemented networks that you can join. And these implementation networks are open, inclusive, community-led and self-governed consortia working across disciplines and countries that are committed to defining and creating specific materials and tools as elements of the Internet of Fair Data and Services, IFDS. They have valuable materials available on their website and also an RDM toolkit. And they also arrange events such as workshops. So please go and have a look at that. Now, as part of Go Fair, there are pillars that you can go and have a look at. The 3 pillars are Go Change, which focuses on priorities, policies, and incentives for implementing FAIR. Then you also get Go Train, which is an initiative where they coordinate FAIR awareness and skills development training. And the 3rd pillar is Go Build, where they coordinate FAIR technology. So have a look at that as well. Now, a more recent development is the CARE data principles. The CARE data principles are Indigenous Data Governance Principles, and the acronym stands for Collective Benefit, Authority to Control, Responsibility, and Ethics. So where did the idea of CARE data principles come from? The CARE principles for Indigenous data governance were drafted at the International Data Week and Research Data Alliance plenary co-hosted event on Indigenous Data Sovereignty Principles for the Governance of Indigenous Data workshop, which was held on 8 November 2018 in Gaborone, Botswana. It focused on Indigenous knowledge and addressed the tension that an emphasis on greater data sharing is creating for Indigenous people who are asserting greater control over the application and use of Indigenous knowledge for collective benefit. And it complements the FAIR principles and open data by considering both people and purpose in their advocacy and pursuits. C stands for collective benefit. In other words, data ecosystems shall be designed and function in ways that enable Indigenous peoples to derive benefit from the data. The 3 principles are for inclusive development and innovation, for improved governance and citizen engagement, and for equitable outcomes. A stands for authority to control. In other words, Indigenous people's rights and interests in Indigenous data must be recognized, and the authority to control such data should be empowered. Indigenous data governance enables Indigenous peoples and governing bodies to determine how Indigenous peoples, as well as Indigenous lands, territories, resources, knowledges, and geographical indicators are represented and identified within data. The 3 principles here are recognizing rights and interests, data for governance, and governance of data. R stands for responsibility. In other words, those working with Indigenous data have a responsibility to share how those data are used to support Indigenous peoples' self-determination and collective benefit. Accountability requires meaningful and openly available evidence of these efforts and the benefits accruing to Indigenous peoples. The 3 principles here are for positive relationships, for expanding capability and capacity, and for Indigenous languages and worldviews. E stands for ethics. In other words, Indigenous people's rights and well-being should be the primary concern of all stages of the data life cycle and across the data ecosystem. And the 3 principles here are for minimizing harm and maximizing benefit, and for justice and for future use. Right, let us recap on what we discussed during the session. In the session, we discussed how openness changes the typical data lifecycle. Next, we touched on the various international organizations that support RDM and open data. Following this, we covered FAIR data, its origin, what is meant by FAIR data, the FAIR principles, and whether FAIR data is the same as open data. We also covered a FAIR data checklist and a FAIR self-assessment tool. This was followed by an overview of the FAIR data initiative, and the session ended with an overview of CARE data principles. Right, now we've come to the end of session 10. Please go to exercise 3. Thank you.